One report, one data point is all Operation Kindness had on a daily basis going out to its teams 5 years ago when I started. One report. I could tell you every day who got adopted. It was the most important thing for everybody at the shelter. But we didn't have anything else. We weren't a data-driven culture. We didn't have goals. I don't think our standard operating procedures had been updated for at least 8 years. And we've come a long way since then. Now, we have over 200 reports that go out to various aspects of our team, daily, weekly, monthly, annually. We track a little bit more information than we did back then. We talk about data every single day. It is ingrained into who we are as an organization, and it is how we have created the environment that leads to the life-saving efforts that Operation Kindness wants to see and wants to be a part of. We have implemented that data-driven culture. We have had a record-breaking year in almost 50 years of our organization's history. We are a data-driven culture today. We want to help you be able to do the same thing. So we welcome you to our session on implementing a data-driven culture. My name is Kelly Furness. I am the Chief Operating Officer for Operation Kindness. I've been there for about 5 years, as I said. I started out as the Director of Volunteer Services and then moved over to the operations side and have been in the COO role for about 3 years.
I am Megan Swan Wilson. I am the Senior Manager of Data and Logistics. I've been in animal welfare over 12 years, starting as a technician, moving my way up, shelter manager, population manager, and now I've been at Operation Kindness for 3 years. So Operation Kindness is a nonprofit animal organization located in Dallas County. We are a managed intake facility. We take in almost 6,000 animals. 80% or above 80% of that intake is from transfers. We concentrate on pulling from municipal shelters as well as looking at our medical and foster animals. We also have a community initiatives department that concentrates on low-cost vaccinations and alterations for the community and shelter partners. So Kelly, why don't you tell us about what we're going to be talking about today?
All right, so we are going to focus in on 5 key areas that we want to share with you that are going to help you move towards that data-driven culture. We're going to start by talking about animal flow. That is the foundation of everything in an animal shelter. So we need to make sure we've got a pretty good foundation that we want to build this culture around. Seems smart. We would talk a little bit about data. I don't know. So that's one of the pillars we'll certainly spend some time on today. In addition to that, we need to talk about process. We need to talk about reporting, and we ultimately need to talk about goals. All of those together are going to help us get to that data-driven culture. So to start, we're going to talk about animal flow. So Megan, talk us through that.
I would love to. Oh, sorry. One more. There we go. So with animal flow, it can be very difficult when looking at your organization to know where to start when reviewing your processes and protocols to find the data points to concentrate on. One of the simplest ways to get started is to look at your animal flow. When talking about animal data, we often look at our intakes to our outcomes, but animal flow is actually the steps that your animal takes from their intake to their outcome. And this is both physically and digitally. So regardless of what type of organization you are, what type of software you have or lack of software, the process is what matters, and you just need to write it down. At Operation Kindness, when I first started there, we didn't really have an animal flow from intake to outcome. It was grouped by what each team was individually doing, and they weren't really communicating with each other. So one of the first steps I did was talk to the individual teams to learn what their animal flow within their department was. And from there, I determined where there were any gray areas. And by a gray area, I mean where there weren't specific requirements to move those animals forward. If it isn't clear to the staff what the next steps for the animal are, then the animals won't move forward. At Operation Kindness, we use a stage flow system. And by stage, I mean it's a field in our shelter database that almost all of the main shelter databases have. Sometimes it's called a status. And it allows you to have a field that you are tracking your animals as they move through the system. So at Operation Kindness, we're very stage heavy. On the screen is an example of this. You see from the intake what stage they go into, which is evaluate. And from there, they take different steps, go to surgery if they need it, vet exam, and ultimately the goal is the stage of available. And this stage flow can be different depending on the animal and where they're coming from. If they're a stray, they'll have a different animal flow than if they are a cruelty case or an owner surrender. So looking at our stage flow, the biggest thing you want to make sure is having specific steps, processes, and procedures at each stage to move that animal through to their outcome. So next, after you have your animal flow, we're going to be talking about how to evaluate it.
There you go. All right, so we're going to start with the data component of this. Obviously, data is pretty crucial in this process. So if you think about whatever problem it is or whatever data piece it is that you're looking to track, what is it that you would want to know at this point? So before we tell you what we would do, we want to hear from you. So if you want to scan that QR code, in one word, what would be the first data point that you would want to dig in deeper and learn more about for your organization? Hopefully it works.
You could also go to menti.com if you don't want to use the QR code. Amanda.
All right, we got a response coming in. So statistics, length of stay, it just got bigger. RTO, a dog's history. All right, the intake reason, behavior, length of stay stays in the center. Got it a few different ways. I see stage, length of stay as well.
Lots of length of stay.
Zip code, interesting, okay.
Roadblocks.
Roadblocks. Health.
Mm-hmm.
These are great. Personality. Why adopters say no. There's a really good session about that yesterday. Animals in the stages. Barriers. Okay. So length of stay looks like it won. Definitely a big component there of what needs to be looked at, along with a lot of other great reasons that we're seeing pop up. So with that, let us talk a little bit about what we wanted to know. Drop right there. So for us, there were 4 areas we really wanted to focus in on. Length of stay was ours as well. Very specifically for us, we wanted to spend some time understanding length of stay in the first stage that animals hit for us, which is that evaluation stage, and what it takes to get them out of that and move to the next path on their journey. We wanted to really look at our population management. What does it look like for this animal to go through our system, both physically in its movement and through the system as well? But we also wanted to understand what our capacity was along with that from a population management perspective. When did we have room to be able to bring in more animals, which again, remember, is our focus to be able to help municipal shelters? And when are we full? And what can we move around? Intakes, adoptions, pretty important to that as well. Everything else is certainly leading to those items, but they were on our radar in the beginning as well. So with those 3 things, the case study for us that we want to really kind of walk you guys through today as our example is around that evaluation stage and the length of stay that we had in that particular section. So now that we have a sense of what data we want to look at, let's talk about what it shows us.
So when looking at your current data, you first need to ask, are you tracking that data?
So why don't we kind of check to see where you guys are? Raise your hand if you use some form of a shelter database management software, right? Good majority of the folks in the room. Raise your hand if you use Excel or Google Sheets or something of that nature, right? So we got a few folks there. Raise your hand if you don't have any of those, and that's part of why you're here today. Okay, so that gives us a little bit of an idea of what we've got.
So if you have a shelter database, are you using your system to its fullest capabilities? When I first got to Operation Kindness, we noticed that there was some areas that we needed to look at for improvement, and one of those was medical. And so we went in to evaluate what was going on in medical, and we determined that we were utilizing about 10% of our shelter database's medical module functionality. So if you aren't using a shelter software, it's still the same question. Are you tracking the data points that you want to analyze? If you aren't, find out how to, and if you are, is it accurate and consistent? How are staff entering it? Are staff entering it the same way? Is there a protocol around entering it? And then most importantly, what happens if it's entered incorrectly? How do you ensure that it gets added correctly? When I started at Operation Kindness, we started this stage-based flow, like a concentration on our animals using stages. And obviously some of those would be inaccurate. As our database's admin, I was the one to go in and fix a lot of the mistakes that were happening. But now we've moved forward with giving those permissions to our managers and our leads, so there's more accountability on the teams when they're looking at their data and really understanding how important it is for it to be accurate.
And that's a really important point that we want you guys to recognize. Depending on where you are in this journey, you may not have a Megan. You may not have somebody that is dedicated to that. We started at Operation Kindness with one of our vet techs who was really our database admin, and she just did it as part of somebody gave it to her. It wasn't anything that she necessarily went and wanted to dig into, but she helped to do that. But it was really challenging. Bringing in a dedicated resource allowed us control intentionally to be able to understand where those errors were, get the consistency, and be able to start to get a better sense of where we were with the data. However, I don't know, I kind of have to let her, have a day off, maybe a PTO day here and there. I struggle when we have a single human who is responsible for something so much so that they're the only person anybody can go to. Many shelters, that's the way it has to be. But as you get the opportunity to be able to expand that and be able to share that responsibility with other people, that's where we are. So we are at the point that we have a consistent process, which we'll talk about. And because of that, we can now coach and train the rest of the team to be able to sustain the data efforts and the integrity that we've put in place.
So once you figure out if you are tracking the data, how do you get that data? So most of our standard or our main shelter databases offer standard reporting options, and we have talked to several of the main ones to get their recommendations on reporting for you all, so you're not leaving here without something to start with. They also sometimes have advanced reporting options.
Yeah, and for those of you that are not using the big databases that have reporting functionality, you're in Excel, you're in Google, things of that nature, there are other options to consider along the way as well. You can certainly look at things like Power BI and Tableau that are not expensive. If you don't know about TechSoup, it's a great partner for nonprofits specifically to be able to get licenses at a pretty good discount. I think we pay $6 a month for a license on Power BI. And if you are just starting out, don't let that intimidate you. It can be pretty simple to get a really basic graph or dashboard in there. You don't have to learn a bunch of really fancy DAX coding and any of that kind of stuff. But just know that there are some other options that could kind of help you to be able to get that data out of the spreadsheet and into some version of a report.
So when talking about our case study, which was the stage of evaluate, and I just want to point out that when we're saying evaluate, that is the intake exam. So when an animal's coming in, they're getting a medical evaluation. For our case study, we were lucky enough to have the historical data to look at where we were. And we also were lucky enough for it to be accurate because it was automatically the first stage that any animal went into from their intake. So reviewing that, we found that the animals were in the stage of evaluate from 1 to 6 days, with the average being 1.4 days. So now that we've gotten to the data, we have to figure out what the data means.
So as I am reviewing that data, the first thing I'm doing is somewhat kind of just selfish, and it's just, is it what I expected? I want to know if my anecdotal, emotional thoughts, I'm supposed to put emotional in quotes, right?
Feelings.
Emotional thoughts are right. Do I have a pulse on my organization? Do I have a pretty good idea where I was, or was I pretty far off? And that just leads me to know some things that I might need to look at. More importantly is the question around, are the results acceptable? Do you like the results? If you're happy with those results, move on. Find something else to focus on. Doesn't mean that you don't want to still go through the journey of making sure you have process, making sure that you have reporting and goals, but your focus is really going to be on those areas that are probably broken. So we're going to focus on that side of it just because it'll show you the full journey, but you could just shortcut it if you have something that you're happy with. When you're not happy with the results, now it's about what are you going to do with that? You need to find what you need to dig into. You need to drill down and be able to start to figure out what's broken. What do you need to work on with that? For us, with the case study and our evaluation stage, 1 to 6 days, not okay. That is a long time for an animal to have just come into the shelter and be waiting for anything. So we knew that that was where we wanted to place that focus. So as we dug in and as we are looking at that particular piece, what we figured out with that part of it is that we didn't really have a process. We didn't have any accountability. We didn't have any prioritization at that point. So we knew that that was the area that we were going to need to jump into. Sorry.
Right. Okay.
So process importing is where we needed to go next. So that's going to take us into really digging into what was taking place at that point.
So we knew that there was an issue, but you have to figure out what is broken. And it can't be general or your feelings. It needs to be based on data. And then why is it broken? We found at Operation Kindness when we were asking the question why, a lot of the answers, and this is probably similar for several organizations here, the answer was always, it's always been that way. So how do you determine why it is broken?
All right. So we've got one more survey question for you guys on this one. Okay, so before we tell you how we went about figuring out what was broken, what would you do? You figured out you have something that's not working. How do you determine what is broken? We'll give you guys a chance to answer that question. Feedback from staff. Where the issues are arising, survey the staff for holes. Survey's probably good too. Sometimes you can get feedback that is allowing them to be a little bit more open. Ask what happened, make it better. This is how we should do it. The data doesn't match. Feedback from adopters. You probably throw volunteers into that as well. I think we scroll down here. Compared to other facilities. Right, industry standards, probably a good one with that as well. All right, so I got a lot of asking questions, and whoever put the 5 whys, you must have read my presentation. All right, so good advice with that piece of it. That takes us to what we decided to do with that piece of it. For us, we wanted to go in and objectively observe to see what the actual process looked like with what we were doing. The really important word in that, objectively. Megan, that was a really important piece that we knew we wanted to have on that slide. Why is objectively so important?
It's very important to be objective when you're coming into a situation that you're evaluating. You want to come into it as a third party, removing your feelings about it and just seeing what the process is so you can understand the staff's perspective around the process and make sure that they feel like they're a part of any future changes.
Asking questions is really important. You guys said that as well. It's really critical that you start to dig in and understand what people think is happening, and you're looking at it from a lot of different angles. The 5 whys is a really great way to do that. If you have interest in understanding root cause analysis, go Google the 5 whys. It's gonna help you to understand a way to be able to get down to that. I promise you, most of the time, when I ask people why something is broken, it's because we don't have enough staff. If my boss is in the room anywhere, we ask all the time, but he usually says no. But anyway, the idea of getting down to the heart of the matter, staffing certainly is probably part of it, but the reality is you may not be able to do anything about that. So what do we do to make the process more efficient? What do we do to rearrange that and do something differently to be able to increase that efficiency and be able to increase our life saving in the process? So digging deeper and really making sure that you get down to the heart of the problem becomes really important. So for our case study, as I said, we looked at it and found there was no process. We looked at it and found there was no accountability or prioritization. The reasoning for that is that we didn't have a really good system in place. With our intake process, we had our medical team responsible for that medical exam and that initial component of the medical piece, and our kennel staff was responsible for the kennel upkeep within the intake room. Well, when things get busy, it just gets put on the back burner. For the medical team, got enough emergencies, enough things that happened that those animals could just wait. Didn't matter that they might, hang out overnight, might make a mess in a kennel that makes a bigger mess to clean up because it wasn't their responsibility. That belonged to the kennel team. The kennel team is just going to get to it when they can get to it because they're usually struggling, staff-wise, to be able to get there and do that. So that was the makeup of what we were dealing with. So that was why we had no accountability and we had no prioritization around what needed to happen. So that's how we got to the point of knowing at least where we were with what was broken and why it was broken. Now we got to figure out how to fix it.
So the first step is always to determine what the process should be. And with this, we looked at industry standards, as well as talking to our teams to get their input, find solutions to any concerns or challenges they have to determine what the new process was going to be. Do you want to talk to that in the...
Yeah, so she's right. We did go to the staff and we did talk to them, but that wasn't the first thing we did. We did make a decision as a leadership team that we were going to determine who was going to have that accountability. So that was a somewhat dictated decision. We didn't ask for a lot of input on it because nobody wanted to make that change. So our medical team definitely struggled with that, but we knew that by putting our medical team as responsible for those rooms, our medical staff, and we have a medical hospital that we have vet tech assistants that do kennel cleaning and take care of the animals in our hospital wing. We just extended it and had that team responsible for it in the intake room. That meant the first time that it happened that they were done and they're like, well, the animals need to move. No, you need to make sure that the space is clean and you need to get them out. Well, if the animals stayed overnight, it was still the medical team that needed to clean those kennels. I'm sure you can imagine suddenly we didn't like animals staying overnight in the intake room. It's funny how quickly incentives build to things that you want to see happen. So the part at the top end of it was us making that change. As a leadership team, we needed to manage that from a change management perspective, deal with certainly some resentment probably, as well as certainly just not being on board with it. But once we had made the decision, then we get the staff involved and we want to talk them through and have them be a part of what is the process going to look like? How do we make this work for you? And how do we work through with the team, with the staffing we have, to be able to accomplish getting these animals through the system of evaluation faster?
So after we determined the process step by step, along with assigning accountability and including what happens to move the animal at each step, this is both physically and digitally, we wrote it all down, and that's how we created our standard operating procedure, SOP. We did trainings on this and walkthroughs with the teams at the same time that we launched the SOP, so everyone was on the same page with the new process. And lastly, we created reports to monitor the results of our new process to be able to create our goals.
Goals. It's my favorite part of the whole thing. I love goals. I am a completist. I play video games. I am the one who's going to finish the game 100%, like every little checkbox of what I need to do. But I like being able to do that with goals because I know we got there. If you don't have goals, how do you know you got there? Because you don't know where you were going. So for us, for the standpoint of the goals, somewhat new. Again, remember, haven't been doing that, one report. So we had a big shift of what we needed to do with that. However, the biggest part that we're at right now, if you think about where we are in this journey, we have talked about the animal flow, we've talked about the data, the process, reporting. I now feel really confident as a leader that I know what my team can do. I know what will stretch them, I know what will break them, and I know what is going to be demotivating if I push too far. Although again, if you know my boss, we push pretty hard. We have to be able to now think about how we want to approach those goals. I am definitely one to want to collaborate with the team, but because we have the information that we do, everybody feels pretty comfortable with what they know is possible because we've really laid it out in front of them to be able to do that. So with that, the next step is actually setting those goals. We took the approach of not just creating the typical type of goals that most of you are probably used to. We did a lot more than that.
Oh, goals. We utilized what the reporting of what the historical data showed us, if we had any, sometimes we didn't, what the current data was showing us, and where we wanted to be as an organization. But most importantly, we included the teams when creating these goals so that they truly understood the why behind them. We have 3 types of goals, which I'll go into in more detail. We have role-based goals, which are also connected to the staff's day-to-day tasks, manager goals, and cross-departmental goals. So when I talk about role-based goals, these, in my opinion, are the most important because you can see where you are in the day-to-day. At the end of the month or the end of the year, you don't want to be shocked or surprised by any of your goals. And it is important for the teams to understand the role in moving animals through your system. So at my previous organization, I did a training on data accuracy, and I thought at the moment that this was going to be like a life-changing moment, that everyone in the room was just going to be like, whoa, this is amazing. Yes, data accuracy, that's what it should be. And I think a couple of you were actually in this room. So what I had done, I wanted to do some visualizations of why data is so important. So I had a photo of the animal's medical history with a little equal sign and then a photo of the animal. And I was trying to portray that the digital history within the shelter database was just as important, not more important, but just as important as the animal when it came to the movement of flow of them getting to their outcome. So I did like dramatic pauses, I showed a cat and then a dog and then another one. And I was just waiting for the audience to be like, yeah, data, accuracy. And that really didn't come. It wasn't the wave that I thought it would be. I didn't change animal welfare by that.
I keep trying to help her understand that not everybody loves data quite as much as we do.
But with role-based goals, it allows your teams to see the impact they're having on the individual animals as well as your overall mission and goals. When talking about manager-based goals, we created manager-based goals that are linked to the team's role, and it allows them to understand not only the day-to-day with their teams, but the overarching goals and where we are in our processes. And I decided to show this example. This is just a quick PowerPoint of our goals and where we are within the month, and obviously we're not meeting the goals, but this allows our managers to look at what's happening, come up with what the challenges are, what the solutions are to ensure that we continue to meet our goals moving forward. Cross-departmental goals are a huge factor also at Operation Kindness. So I do have a very beautiful dashboard of visualizations.
It's really pretty.
It is not this.
Not this.
So I'm just showing this because it does not need to be fancy. This is what our managers want to utilize. And it just shows what department, sometimes there's multiple departments because they're working together on a goal, what the goal is, where we are, and then we write any comments about what we need to work on or what we need to figure out to make these goals. And this is something that each manager is manually updating every week, but it gives them accountability on their goals. And then that way everyone knows where they are within their process. So now that we've put the pieces together, are we done?
I think we're going to Disney. I think we're done. Yeah? Okay, no, we're not quite done. We've gone through all of the steps. We definitely have the roadmap of what we need to be able to get there. We have the pieces in place. The challenge at this point is we need to be able to sustain it. That's the critical element here. So I want you to think about where we've gone in this with these goals and these reports. We start with role-based, meaning that every individual has things that they are accountable to, and they are kept abreast of where they are daily, weekly, whatever is necessary for that particular goal that they have. That means we're getting to things very quickly. We can pivot if something looks awry very quickly. We then have the manager goals that in turn help us to be able to look at it more holistically, and then even bigger with the cross-departmental goals, again with accountability, helping to reduce those silos that are going to happen. I am sure you guys recognize somewhere within your system, every team that touches those animals impacts their journey. And in many cases, what happens before the animal gets to me impacts my ability to get him through my part, and what I do impacts the downstream piece as well. So it really is about helping to tie the elements together and it be a big part of the conversation. So as Megan talked about, we talk about goals all the time. We talk about data all the time, every day. For me, it is built into the one-on-ones that I do with Megan every week. They are built into the one-on-ones I do with Heather, who is our VP of Lifesaving program. She runs everything in the shelter from the animals' intake through outcome. So like 9 different teams. We talk about it. Heather and I probably talk about it more than once a week. We talk about it all the time. I will tell you though that the real movement that we got towards this really being a part of the culture was when we pushed it to being a part of the weekly manager meetings. We started to go over that goal sheet. We started to talk about it together. We celebrate the wins, and we talk about when we've got a miss, and we talk about it together. We're gonna talk about what's causing it. We're gonna give the feedback. If that department is causing me to not get my work done, let's talk about it in an open environment with some feedback that can help us to be able to move in the right direction. Now, that is not to say that if we have a performance-based issue, that we're having that conversation in a team meeting. I am a big believer in praise in public, but coach in private. So if you have a performance issue, you do take that behind the closed doors kind of idea, all right? So that's where we started and what we've been doing to be able to sustain that. As we have gone through this, we go back to our case study of the evaluation stage. As we talked about, we started back at 1 to 6 days. Average was really about 1.5 days. And as we have implemented these tools and been able to build this culture, we have gotten those numbers down to under 0.1 days. An animal moves through our evaluation stage in less than 2.5 hours. I'll hold the applause because there's a better spot. Hold on. With that, really important, I do want to note this. One of the other things that came with this is we have moved to vaccinating upon intake, and that doesn't mean within the 2.5 hours. That's the first thing that happens, and then it's the other pieces that are taking the other 2.5 hours to kind of make happen with that. So that's where we've come to with that particular goal. The great part about it is that daily report, I don't even look at it much anymore because I don't have to. I may spot check it, but we're where we need to be, so it's not something that I put my focus towards. Better yet, let's look at the big picture. 2023, Operation Kindness had a record-breaking year. In our almost 50-year history, we have had some of the best numbers we have ever seen. Our intake department is up over 22% over last year. We are at almost 6,000 intakes, and remember, we want intakes. Adoptions are up 26%. We're up in the 5,700 range. We got through this initial wave of doing this work, and we went back for more. We went and found other things we wanted to focus on, one of those things being our foster team. Our foster team is up 57% over last year on the number of animals in foster. 2,200 animals. Last but not least is our medical team. We pride ourselves on being able to help animals that need help from a medical perspective, and our spay-neuter surgeries are up over 29% from last year, up to about 4,400 spay-neuter surgeries as well. Record breaking. And it all started with that one report. All right. This is what has led us to a data-driven culture. We've put these pieces in place, and it's not just the leadership team, it is the entire group. Everybody knows what we focus on. We post our goals in the hallways. Everybody knows what we're trying to achieve as we go. So that's what it took for us to get there. We obviously want to help you to get there. So let's recap what we've looked at.
So to review, the steps you can take to implement a data-driven culture, you're going to determine your animal flow, and again, I said this like 7 times, but this is both physically and digitally. They need to go hand in hand. You have to have a plan for both. Understand how you're tracking your data. Look into your shelter database if you haven't already. Evaluate your current processes objectively. Implement reporting. And again, we'll show you some examples of that within your own shelter database if you want that within the resources. You're going to set goals that are realistic. You're going to set them for your team, the management, and cross-departmental. You're going to celebrate your wins and learn from your misses, and then you start it all over again. And if your animal flow is perfect and you don't want to concentrate on that, then you could just go to step 2. So, Kelly, where do we go from here?
Well, Operation Kindness is just going to keep going and trying to have a bigger impact on life-saving. But the real question is, where do you guys go from here? If you are leaders in this room, make it happen. Become the data-driven person yourself that wants to build this culture within your organization. You may not have a Megan, that's okay. You may have someone like the person that we had initially that had a little bit of an interest and is willing to start to dig in and to take a look at it. Maybe it's you. Maybe it is someone that is a volunteer that could help you to begin to just get some things pulled together. There's a lot of ways to potentially tackle it if you are the leader within the organization. But swallowing the data and being able to make it happen certainly works really well when it's coming from the top down. But if you are in this room and that doesn't apply to you, and you are maybe the data person yourself or someone who is here wanting to be able to see how you can just improve what's happening, Megan, what do they do with that?
So I might have data in my title, but I started out as just a regular shelter staff person that can't do math, which is embarrassing to say in front of a bunch of people, but I just want to throw that out there. And I just had a feeling that there was something that I could be doing to make the process more efficient. I was a shelter supervisor at the time, and we were using whiteboards, we were using paper forms, and it just didn't seem like we were moving the animals through the system the way that we should. So I started looking into our shelter database, and as probably many of you in the room, suddenly you're the expert for the organization, and people are asking you for all your reporting tips and everything. But it just started because I was just a shelter person, not good at math, but I knew and felt that there was something, had a feeling, there was something that I could be doing to make the process more efficient. And then I learned, after learning about what could happen with reporting and using data, I shared that impact and why to leadership. So hopefully for those of you in the room, if you have a feeling and you're just a regular person that's not good at math, or maybe you're great at math and that's perfect, then this is your chance to really make that impact by using data. So this quote is a favorite of ours, and by ours, we
do mean Ed.
We mean Ed.
CEO.
But it's what gets measured gets managed.
Yeah. We love it too, definitely. Yeah. So kind of to bookend where we started with this, Remember that for us, this all started with one report, one data point that told us who got adopted, and we've grown it from there to where we are today. You have to think about where you are now and just take one step. Don't get overwhelmed by trying to do all of this. We've been at this for 3 years. We've done little pieces along the way that are really showing us that progress at this point. So think about it from that perspective and utilize the tools in front of you. What gets measured gets managed, applies to everybody.
So this is a QR code of some resources for you. The biggest thing is if you have a shelter database, whether it be Shelter Love, Shelter Buddy, Pet Point Chameleon, or Animals First, we did talk with them and get their recommendations for reporting from intakes, outcomes, foster, how to handle medical, so you have a starting point. There is also a Canva template for you if you want to create your own little animal flow chart. And then there are additional links about more resources. There's a link to our training on if you're interested in how we do it at Operation Kindness as far as stage-based reporting, there's a training on that. And then of course, Kelly and our emails are there, also in the QR code, but we're happy to talk details with you because I'm sure several of you are wanting more information than we just gave, and we're happy to give it.
Absolutely. One of the things we also added today onto there is just a quick form. We recognize that not all people are comfortable. We're about to say you can come to the mic. We put a form on there for you to come and ask us questions that we'll follow up with you on if you're more comfortable doing that as well. But we do have a little bit of time, so if anyone has questions, we don't get to play with the little ball in this room. We get to use the microphone. So if you do have a question, if you want to come over to this microphone, we will be happy to entertain questions until we are done with time. It's got to be somebody brave. I shouldn't have told them that it was in the QR code. Maybe that's the problem.
Yeah.
Is that what happened? Oh, we've got somebody. Woohoo! Yay. Let's give him a hand for being so brave. Come on. It's just a big room. He had to come a long way.
Wonderful presentation. I imagine you've worked with a lot of different organizations, a lot of different softwares. In terms of shelter management software, do you find one leading the edge in terms of like data collection and reporting over the others?
That's a really loaded question.
It's a super loaded question. Loaded for bear.
There's a bunch of them in the other room. I think I'm going to give that, and I'm going to let you kind of talk to it as well. But that a lot of times is going to depend on where you are in the process and what your needs are. We'd be happy to talk about that offline, just from the standpoint of kind of where your organization is and what your needs are, because it really does matter to that. If you don't do stage or status based, some of them may not be a good fit for you. Some of them have better reporting than others. So there's some elements to that that really have to kind of be fine-tuned to what your needs are for your group.
Yes, I would echo that it is really dependent on what you need as an organization. And we can definitely talk further about
Absolutely.
it because we have spent a lot of time, by we, that means me, researching and talking to the different shelter softwares on what they have capabilities of.
But in the resources, Megan has done a lot of work. She's done some other presentations on the various softwares and kind of what they do. Some of that resources, the data of that is at that link with the QR code. So that may get you started, but definitely reach out to us. We'll be happy to talk more.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I've got a question. You've had a lot of content in that presentation. Thank you. You talked about sharing information with your staff. I believe you said you post your goals. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Can you share sort of the breadth of the goals that you're sharing with all of your staff? Because obviously you have some things that you have maybe at the management level or the leadership level. What are you sharing with all of your staff as organizational goals?
Yeah. One of the things, and it was on one of the previews, and I want to pull off of the QR code, but on one of the slides, that'll be in the Best Friends app, I think, if it's not already there. One of the things that we did that was kind of the start of it for the shelter operations team as a whole was holiday goals. So as an organization, we have a pop-up adoption event that we do during the holidays at one of the malls near us, and we set goals for what we hoped we'd get adopted. And we posted it in the hallway. And suddenly it was like, what is this? What are we doing? How close are we? And people wanted to start to know just because they'd be walking down the hallway and it was available. Now the managers, hopefully, were talking to their teams about those goals, but it was there for us to be able to kind of post from a global perspective. Tell us what else was on that holiday goals as far as beyond the adoptions.
Yeah, it was really important for us to have each team have their own goal, even if that didn't really connect to our overarching goals. So for like kennel, we had a goal of how long it's taking to reset the kennels and move the animals after they've had an assigned kennel. We had goals based on, yeah, there it is. So I think this is just one.
It's just
it was
one
several
example of it,
pages, but everyone had, we had adoptions, we had donations, foster, like specific inside foster, we have a program called Foster First. All of it, there was many different areas, but the biggest thing was we wanted each team to have a goal that they were working towards so they felt included and excited when we met that goal.
Yeah. That took a little effort because not all of it is black and white data. So there's some of that that's in there that we had to really think hard to get to something. One of the things we are building and working towards to make that even a bigger thing, because we now are not just at one location. We have an adoption center in one of the pet stores. We have several others, and then we have our community initiatives team who has another location. So we have a website that is our SharePoint site, basically, that we call Treatsville. And we've just really gotten it started, and right now it's mainly focused on making sure to share all of the standard operating procedures. But on the main page, the intention will be to be able to share some of the goals and where we are on things with that, as well as our goal here over the next few months is to move some of our stuff into Power BI so that we can get more of that real time every day. I know who's been adopted so far today. I know who has been brought in from an intake perspective. So that's coming as we go back, and we went back to step number one. We've continued to evolve that and start to look at that. So communicating across our entire organization is harder because we've gotten bigger, but those are some of the steps that we're going to do. And if you have Microsoft Office, you have access to SharePoint, so there's ways to be able to do that.
So y'all spoke to the fact that in the everyday of animal care, there's a lot of chaos and you get swept up in emergencies and there's always things draining on your time. So do you have any tips for management of your staff to make sure that data entry remains a priority and you don't get in a position where you're not sure if your data is good or if everything's up to date?
Yeah. From my end of it, as kind of the leader of that group, it's because we keep talking about it. So they know that that is an element that doesn't get to be put on a back burner. It's expected. We are going to have emergencies. We are going to have those things. It leads to where we're trying to get everybody to be better at communicating of, I've got to handle this. I have this thing that I need to get done, and this, and this. Which one do you want me to do first? And trying to get to a place where people can talk to that. I think we have some groups that are challenged in they are so passionate about helping and doing the work and taking care of the animals that we all run into the burnout and we run into the things that can be challenging. We have to take care of our people and help them to know that there are times they do have to just stop and be able to look at it as a holistic view that we're going to get as much done as we can. But this piece of it is really important. Like Megan and I have talked about that a lot of times of, I need some of this data because I can't lead the organization without it. So we have to find ways to do that so that we can continue to do more work. We've managed through the emergencies, we've managed through a lot of those pieces, and we had a record-breaking year. So it can be done.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Can I just add to that also looking at your processes with your teams where you can add direct entry data. So you're not using paper forms, you're not using whiteboards. I am so excited to say that I think we're down to like one whiteboard and it's not data points that are being added to it. So if you could look at your systems and processes and really streamline that for your staff so they're not writing things and then re-entering them in other areas, that can also help with that.
Inefficiency in the system obviously are a big part of it. As we've streamlined that, it makes better time across the system. Thank you. All right, I think that's it. We're out of time. Thank you guys so much. We appreciate you guys coming.